That year, such a fall happened, quiet to some, thunderous to others. In 1521, a young man stood atop the towering walls of Belgrade, gazing out at the smoldering ruins of a once impregnable fortress. His name was Suleiman. At just 26, he was in his first year as Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and this was his first campaign. Victory had come swiftly, shockingly so. For his predecessors, Belgrade had been a curse. For Suleiman, it was a gateway. His father, Selim the Grim, had conquered the Arab world, but never taken Belgrade. His great-grandfather, Mehmed the Conqueror, who had brought down Constantinople, had failed to breach its walls. Yet Suleiman, with thunderous artillery and a single-minded army, had done it on his first try. And far away in Europe's courts and cathedrals, the shock was only just beginning. While Suleiman was battering down the gates of Belgrade, the crowned heads of Europe were busy, in all the wrong ways. The Pope was fighting Martin Luther's ideas. Francis I of France and Charles V of the Habsburgs were entangled in a brutal rivalry. Henry VIII of England was still dreaming of a son and writing defenses of Catholicism. No one was looking east. No one had time for the Turks. The Ottomans were united. No civil wars, no succession disputes, no rebellion strong enough to matter. While Europe fractured along religious and dynastic lines, the empire stretching from Cairo to Constantinople moved forward with terrifying cohesion. And behind that unity stood a brutal, efficient logic. There were no rival princes to challenge Suleiman, because his father had executed them all. Suleiman's father, Selim I, ensured an uncontested succession by eliminating all potential rivals, including brothers, cousins, and nephews. The message was clear. There would be no second claimant to the throne. Suleiman understood the weight of that sacrifice. He was the only one left. Every day on the throne was a reminder. He reigned not just for himself, but for the bloodline that had been sacrificed to secure his rise. That burden became ambition. His dreams stretched far beyond the Bosporus. How did the Ottoman Empire sustain such relentless expansion? One key lay in its unique military system, a blend of pragmatism, meritocracy, and violence. Known as the timar system, it rewarded soldiers not with salaries, but with land. Fighters who proved themselves in battle received fiefdoms from which they could collect taxes. These holdings were not hereditary. If a warrior's son wanted the same privilege, he too would have to earn it on the battlefield. It was a simple equation. Conquest brought rewards. Failure meant exile, or worse. It resembled ancient Sparta more than medieval France. Discipline was strict, corruption punished, and performance everything. Even slaves captured from Christian lands could rise through the ranks, earning titles and land if they shed enough blood in the name of the Sultan. The empire ran on gunpowder, but also on ambition. Belgrade, perched at the confluence of the Sava and Danube rivers, had long been a thorn in the side of the Ottoman Empire. It was more than a fortress. It was the gate to Central Europe. And for decades, that gate had remained shut. Even Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, had failed to break it. Back in 1456, his campaign had been repelled by a fierce Hungarian defense led by John Hunyadi, driven by crusading zeal and bolstered by last-minute reinforcements. Ottoman artillery, still in its infancy, couldn't bring down the thick walls. Logistics faltered, morale cracked, and the great Sultan turned back in defeat. But 65 years later, the world had changed, and so had the Ottomans. In 1521, Suleiman returned to Belgrade with a different army, a different empire, and a different kind of war. He brought with him hundreds of cannons, hardened siege engineers, and tens of thousands of soldiers. His forces didn't just surround the city. They cut off its rivers, its supply lines, and its hope. This time, the artillery worked. Day and night, heavy bombardment tore at the ancient walls. The Hungarians, weakened and politically divided, failed to organize a meaningful relief. Europe, preoccupied with religious conflicts and dynastic rivalries, barely looked east. Belgrade held out for weeks, then months, but eventually it fell. The victory stunned Europe, not only for its scale, but for what it signified. The Ottomans were no longer content with the Balkans. They were no longer just a threat. They were now a central player in European politics. From the gates of Vienna to the walls of Rome, fear began to spread. Belgrade in 1521 was not just a battlefield victory. It was a pressure point in the fabric of Eurasia. Pressed hard enough, and the whole weave began to shift. The cannons that brought down its walls also sent shockwaves through royal courts, military maps, and alliances from Central Europe to the far reaches of Asia. The fall of Belgrade toppled a series of dominoes. A kingdom vanished. An empire wavered. An old order cracked. A new maritime challenger rose, and distant powers adjusted their posture. The wings of the butterfly had begun to stir. With Belgrade gone, Hungary's southern frontier collapsed. Within 5 years, its army was crushed and its king dead. The kingdom fractured, divided between the Ottomans, the Habsburgs, and a buffer state that would change hands for centuries. A once proud kingdom became a battleground of empires. The Ottoman sudden advance forced the Habsburgs to fight on two fronts, against internal religious upheaval and an external military juggernaut. Protestant reformers were no longer just a nuisance. They became potential allies in the defense of the realm. The empire's unity began to fray under the weight of strategic necessity. In the wake of Belgrade, Europe's diplomatic taboos began to erode. Faced with Habsburg dominance and an emboldened Ottoman front, France began to reassess its strategic options, including ideas once thought heretical. That idea was an alliance with the Ottoman Empire. A Catholic kingdom even contemplating military cooperation with a Muslim power. It would have been unthinkable a generation earlier, condemned from every pulpit in Europe. But geopolitics has its own logic. France, hemmed in by Habsburg power to the east, south, and north, saw in Suleiman not a religious adversary, but a potential counterweight. The actual Franco-Ottoman alliance would not materialize until the 1530s, but the fall of Belgrade planted the seed. From this moment on, survival began to rewrite the rules. The land victory at Belgrade energized Ottoman ambitions at sea. With stronger footholds in Europe, they expanded westward across the Mediterranean, challenging traditional naval powers and reshaping trade routes. Venice's centuries-old dominance began to fade, while Spanish galleons faced relentless Ottoman raids along key shipping lanes. Ports changed hands, pirate states emerged under Ottoman protection, and the balance of maritime power tilted south and east. What had been a regional empire was fast becoming a global one. From Persia to the Indian subcontinent, other empires watched closely. Ottoman momentum in the west meant potential pressure in the east. Armies were repositioned. Borders were reinforced. Alliances reconsidered. Belgrade's fall echoed far beyond the Balkans. What happened at Belgrade reminded the world. Sometimes a single crack in a wall is all it takes to shake an entire continent. While the Ottomans marched west and redrew the balance of Europe, their ripple effects traveled further than even they imagined. By seizing control of the old Silk Road routes and dominating the eastern Mediterranean, they didn't just block Europe's path to the east, they pushed it out to sea. And from those sea routes came ships. From the ships came silver. And that silver, extracted from the New World, carried by Spanish galleons across the Pacific, poured into the Ming Empire, reshaping its economy, its taxes, and its place in a world it thought it could shut out. The Ottomans never aimed for China, but by forcing Europe to find another way, they helped create the very age of exploration that would eventually reach it. The butterfly's wings, after all, don't stop at borders.